Chechen special forces decimate Russians in the east. Many of them, they have different reasons, but they are united by one common goal. And as a result of this, the Russian forces who face, besides the Ukrainian army, they also face the Chechens, the International Legion, and also the Russian resistance. And as you can imagine, Putin is rapidly runs out of single-use soldiers. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And let's go straight to the point and talk first of all about the Chechens. And at this very moment, there are at least 3 major military units who are fighting on the side of Ukrainians. It is the Dzhokhar Dudayev Battalion, Sheikh Mansur Battalion, and also the Sons of Ichkeria. Some fight on the side of Ukraine because they are simply Ukrainians themselves. The others, they fight against the Russians because of their complicated history. Another group might be fighting against Putin, while the fourth one, and I would say that all of them are united by the common goal, to liberate Chechnya, their homeland. Dzhokhar Dudayev Battalion, for example, which was named after the very first president of the Chechen Republic, Dzhokhar Dudayev, is fighting against Russia almost since the beginning of the entire invasion, back in 2014. But back in October of last year, when Ukraine was one of the very first countries to recognize the independence of Ichkeria from Chechnya, this is when these specific Chechens, they became even more passionate about fighting on the side of Ukraine. Previously, even President Zelensky himself received the highest awards from Ichkeria, which only made these two countries to be even closer. But besides the Russians, those Chechens are also fighting to liberate their Chechnya from the current leader, Ramzan Kadyrov, appointed by the Russian authorities and pretty much Putin himself in the beginning of 21st century. According to them, Ramzan Kadyrov does not represent a real Chechen person. They did not vote for him, and he, because he is known for being brutal, especially in the past, he took some parts of their lives or maybe even relatives or friends from them. And another thing they're trying to do is to break the stereotype that Chechens are pretty ruthless people, while in fact, if we speak to some Ukrainian soldiers fighting alongside members of Dzhokhar Dudayev Battalion, they say that those Chechen guys are one of the best people they ever met. And pretty much yes, as their ultimate mission, as soon as they will be able to help Ukrainians liberate their own country, potentially there will be a disruption within the Russian government authorities, and maybe this will be a very good opportunity for them to bring back their own homeland. All the other military units of Chechens who are fighting alongside Ukrainians, such as Sheikh Mansur Battalion, Chechen Liberation Army, Sons of Ichkeria, and pretty much so on, all of them share the same goal, but they might have different reasons why they joined this fight against Russians. The majority of them decided to fight because Russians destroyed their country back in the 90s. Some of them they fight because they are Ukrainians, while the others decided to join the Ukrainian side because they have friends and relatives who are currently within the Ukrainian forces. And as they all say, it does not matter where we come from, because all of us we share the same enemy. And since then, according to the Ukrainian sources, these Chechens have been helping them liberating pretty much all the territories in the past, including Kharkov, Kherson, and they're also being deployed right now in the hottest spot of Bakhmut. The total number of Chechens fighting on the side of Ukraine is obviously unknown. This information is strictly confidential, but according to some rough estimations, it can be as many as 20,000. And these are not just your regular soldiers, these are battle-hardened veterans. Some of them they have been fighting almost their entire lives. Some of them they have this unforgiven feeling since the Second and the First Chechen Wars, and they came to Ukraine basically looking for retribution. And I mean, whenever you have a fresh Russian conscript, which has been trained for less than 2 weeks, being afraid and forced into Ukraine, and on the other side, you have a Chechen battalion with people whose experience exceeds decades. So, I mean, in this case, who would you expect to be more victorious? And to make things even worse for the Russian army, according to the interviews with those Chechen soldiers, The Russian soldiers are being literally sent to the meat grinder. For example, these Chechens, they are sitting inside the building, being on their command post, and then they see a battalion or a small, group of Russians literally walking in the middle of the street with no tank support, with no nothing. Obviously, Chechens eliminate them, and then guess what? 1 hour later, another group of Russians approach. And ultimately, like mentioned previously, one of their original goals will be to liberate their own home after the war in Ukraine is over, and to replace Ramzan Kadyrov from his position of the leader of Chechnya, which once again, none of them selected or ever voted for him. And they feel it deep inside their hearts that they are not the only people of Chechnya who feel this way, so it is almost certain, as they say, as soon as they start liberating small cities within Chechnya, more and more people will join their liberation army, all the way until they reach the capital of Grozny, and then we might see a final confrontation. Because, it is in the nature of Chechens to be a respectable person, to be a powerful and strong person. And whenever Ramzan Kadyrov mocks pretty much his soldiers or the rest of population by sending his teenage children to this war in Ukraine while they're being just babysit far behind the front lines, or for example this even most recent case where 5 captured Chechens returned back to their home and they were not welcomed by Ramzan Kadyrov, he said that a real Chechen man can never be captured. You are a disgrace. So if you want to return your reputation, you have to go back to Ukraine and fight. This is the only way how you can be accepted back into the society. On the one hand, we have extremely highly motivated people, not just to win this war in Ukraine and crush every single obstacle on their way, but to also liberate their own motherland. And on the other hand, we have fresh Russian conscripts, which majority of the Russian forces at this very moment consist of. Because in the very beginning of the invasion, Russia already sacrificed its trained soldiers, and now there is no one else to replace them, and there is no one else to train fresh conscripts, except just very basic military education. And Ukrainians themselves are pretty powerful and strong soldiers, but when you add the Chechens here, for whom the majority of their lives were in the military case scenario, they have been in war since childhood, and this is when they share their experience with already pretty prepared Ukrainians, so you can only imagine the results. It is estimated that since the beginning of this invasion, the total number of Russian losses is approximately 200,000 people, which happened in approximately less than 1.5 years. And just once again, one of the main reasons for this, it is because Russia, and especially Putin himself, considers his army as a single-use soldiers. In his understanding, you can always just increase the propaganda, recruit and mobilize more people, and send them to the front lines, and when they are being eliminated, you just recruit more. And this was kinda confirmed whenever Russia had their first partial mobilization in September of the last year, when allegedly 300,000 people, but I'm pretty sure way more, were mobilized, and there was not a single basically denial, or there was not a single opposition from the Russian people. Yes, some of them, they tried to escape the mobilization, they ran to different countries, pretty sure they were very unhappy, but nothing significant happened. And this is the major Putin's bet, that the people of Russia will never repel him. And among these extremely high losses, I would say that at least half of them were for Wagner private military company, which belongs to Yevgeny Prigozhin. This military unit, as you might know, consists primarily of the prisoners, and they were responsible for this partial success of Russians in Bakhmut. And speaking about Bakhmut, by the way, the majority of total Russian losses came from this small, insignificant, strategically city alone. And so yes, recently Evgeny Prigozhin, he started saying that our resources are getting extremely low, there is no support from the Ministry of Defense of Russia, there is no ammunition, so if there is no help at all to this private military company, Wagner might pull out from Bakhmut, and then Russian army do whatever you want. Because honestly, if we subtract Wagner from the Russian army, there is literally not a single achievement since the beginning of the invasion. And at the same time, if there is no Wagner, the only people on the Russian side who will remain, at least the majority of the Russian army, will be once again these fresh conscripts, facing highly trained Ukrainians, not just by their Chechen comrades, but also by the Western countries. And once again, there is not a single chance Russia will do anything after this. But I mean, yes, we already established that Putin does not consider a human life in Russia as something significant. What he might care more about is the military equipment, machines, tanks, missiles and armored personnel carriers, for example. And I mean, yeah, you probably already know that Russia also experiences difficulties with this one as well. To some point, whenever they had to pretty much unlock their museum exhibitions and drive T-54s or whatever they are called tanks, which were used in the 1950s. I mean, just imagine a tank from 1950s versus Leopard 2. Russians are losing a lot of military equipment as well, and not just losing on the battlefields, being completely destroyed. Ukrainians also take those prisoners who are driving these tanks, and they pretty much accumulate Russian military vehicles as well. So you can already see where I'm going, right? On the one hand, it's highly unprofessional army, where the average experience of a soldier, I would say, is less than several months. They do not have many military vehicles left, and those which are riding on the battlefronts are maybe like 70-plus-year-olds. And on the other hand, we have pretty much professional army, guided and trained by the West, and then led by Chechens, whose entire life has been in war, who are obviously know a lot about combat activities, and there is simply no way in not a single universe under these circumstances where Russia wins. And as soon as Ukraine is victorious, as soon as Russian people will see that this whole invasion was nothing but invasion, not a special military operation, this was pure and simple invasion, maybe this is when they start thinking, and this is when they start fighting against Kremlin, at least inside their own heads. Because after all, good always beats evil, and those responsible will face their consequences. And as always, I will be right here to make an update for you guys, and if you don't want to miss it, just please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. The best way to support my work will be through my Patreon, where you can unlock hundreds of uncensored footage, there's still 1 week of free access, and the link is down below. You can also become my channel member and unlock exclusive badges and emojis, or simply use a PayPal link. Thank you so much for attention, товарищи, and see you in 2 days.